use SKO in this discussion to talk about any type of sales kickoff meeting. So it may be an annual meeting, it may be a national sales meeting or regional. Anytime you're getting that team together, and what can we do about it? So we'll be talking about why it's important, why SKOs are important, and the objectives of those. How we measure the impact, which I think is a super important question to be asking is, what are we expecting to get out of it? What do we do before, during, and after to maximize the value of that sales kickoff? And then we'll talk a little bit about collaborative learning and, how do we keep the magic alive, if you will, and what can collaborative learning do in this new environment, especially when we're hybrid, to keep us engaged and to ensure we do get some behavior change and some real sales results as we go forward. So just before we jump in, anything you would highlight here, Dave, or anything else on the agenda you want to point out?
No, I mean, I'm excited about the topic. I know that both you and I have worked personally on a lot of SKOs. We want to kind of share some best practices with our group today.
Yeah, and as always, we'll make this interactive and in discussion with our participants, and we always learn from our group as we go through. So we'll have several chances to participate, and I'm always excited to see what new trends and what people are doing in these days. But David, let's start off and talk a little bit about what some of the challenges are with the sales team these days and selling in this environment, and why it's important to maybe weave those in and talk about them during our SKOs. But can you talk a little bit about economically, macroeconomically, what's going on and the impact of that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just kind of say the overall theme that we're hearing is uncertainty, right? I mean, you read one day with higher interest rates, we're going to have a recession, but then you read the next day in the financial press, there's still labor shortages. And then maybe the next day, Amazon or tech companies laying people off. So it's unclear, right? And people, maybe we're going to have a soft landing, maybe an economic hard landing, meaning a recession. No one really knows. But there's more uncertainty now about the go forward next 12 months in the economy, whether it's in the US or globally, than I've seen in a long, long time. So uncertainty to me in the economic picture is a big theme that we're hearing from our clients.
Yeah, and I think as we're looking at planning for our SKOs, we really need to keep those themes in mind. And one, make sure we're weaving that into, well, what does that look like for 2023 that we can control? Because there are a lot of things outside of our control. And also, how do we set our sales team up for success? Because we want to retain those who are with us and, fight to keep those top performers on board. And then, think about how to make them successful. So one of the things we're also hearing is that, budgets are uncertain and decisions are being delayed. I know we see that where it's not necessarily a no, but we're going to need more time, or we're doing some rebudgeting, or we're going to look at that next quarter. So obviously that has an impact on the sales team, and I'm sure you all on the webinar are feeling that these days in one way or another. And we know that there are more decision makers involved, both during and coming out of COVID. We know that number has continued to go up. There are more senior stakeholders that are scrutinizing those buying decisions. Maybe stakeholders that haven't been involved before are getting involved. And at the same time, getting access continues to be challenging because in some cases, things haven't opened up completely, or maybe there are more controls in place, like in healthcare, where maybe we can't just go walk the halls like we used to, or hang out in a coffee shop and wait for people to come by. So I think we need to think about those types of challenges as we're building our plans and we're working on those selling skills going forward. And David, do you want to talk a little bit about hybrid as well?
Well, yeah.
What's your crystal ball say there?
Let's say that hybrid is the third big uncertainty, right? The economy, budgets, which is kind of an offshoot of the economy, obviously, and then where will your customers actually be located? And I think a hybrid, can present unique challenges to a sales team. For some sales team, selling remotely may be a benefit, but for others, it's not so much. My take on it, based on what I've been reading in my research, is that hybrid is here to stay, that it's going to be very challenging to kind of put the genie back in the bottle and force people to come in, your sales team to an office 5 days a week. I mean, in real time, we're seeing with Twitter, as an example, a timely example, they're trying to force people back in the office and it's not being very successful. People are quitting. So even in the face of tech layoffs, where maybe the tech economy isn't that robust, people would rather be at an employer where they can work from home than work in an office. And for a sales team, that can impact, given the reality that hybrid work is here to stay, at least in the short run. And I really do think it's here to stay. People like it better. There's challenges for sales managers. How do you manage a hybrid team? And I also think for salespeople, depending on the industry, there may be some challenges in terms of engaging and getting access to buyers.
Yeah, so it's interesting thinking back, when things first shut down, beginning of COVID, there was a really hard pivot to, okay, how do we do everything virtually? And I think a lot of sales teams kind of adopted those skills. We certainly did a lot of training in that space. But now it's really, well, we need to sell in a hybrid world. Sometimes that's virtual, sometimes that's in person, but understanding where are our customers, how are we going to engage with them? And again, working that into the themes. So when we think about making SKOs successful, we think it's really essential that they happen, that they kick things off with on a positive note for 2023, especially when there are some headwinds, but we need to acknowledge that and help work through that. And I think getting the team together to continue to build that culture, and sometimes that can be in person, sometimes it's regional, sometimes it is virtual, but at least having those connection points that I think many sales teams missed during COVID. So how do we recreate that? And then to the extent that we can start to work on behavior change and training new skills, communicating a vision for what's going to happen going forward, and even launching new initiatives. So strategy, product, tech, whatever those things are, it's a great opportunity, right, to do that during the SKO. David, in terms of working with clients, what else have you seen, and what would you say about this idea of making SKO successful in 2023?
Well, first of all, I'm just making a mental note that I think, Ray, you actually were on a webinar a year ago. Maybe I have the timer. I think it was a year ago, but it was all about virtual SKOs, right? Yeah. So, my assumption is that most teams want to get together and things have opened up where people are traveling, and most SKOs, at least we're hearing from our customers, are going to be in person. When I look at this list, every bullet point here is a valid reason to get your team together. I think the challenge that we hear a lot from our clients is doing too much, right? Because if you think about, we got 5 bullet points here. Any one of these could be a day or 2 days, and there's a lot of competing interests in this kind of list. And this is very common, when you think about how SKO agendas are put together. You start with a blank sheet of paper and then people pile on, right? The product person, hey, we're going to launch a new product. I want half a day to introduce it and walk the team through it. The strategy person, the chief revenue officer, everyone wants to get on the agenda. And what happens is you, in many cases, get too much stuff on that agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, coming out of that, we're like, well, what did we really accomplish? And I know those agendas, right? You have to fight for every minute for the time. Everybody wants their piece while we have people together. But really think about, what are we trying to accomplish? And that's really going to be our next topic here. And this will be really interesting, because one of the themes, and we'll talk about some of the things to achieve those outcomes, right? To the impact we're looking for. But we'd love to get an idea from the audience today. How do you measure the success of your SKO? And I don't mean that to be a trick question, but I guess that, the question of, are we measuring it? And if so, what outcomes are you looking for? And how are you measuring the success? So if we could get people, I'd love to have you just chat in a few things in the chat here. If you have those measurements, what they look like. And David, what do you think we're going to hear from this response and from the attendees here?
Well, see, Adam's saying general NPS scores from attendees. And I think, obviously surveys are, a very go-to thing. Post-attendee surveys, yeah, I mean, that doesn't surprise me. Yep. I mean, I'm very interested to hear our audience, what they have to say, because it's such a such a relevant question. I don't think there's one go-to answer on how to measure it. It really depends on, what exactly are you trying to measure?
Yeah, and Melody brings up, and I love this because think about metrics before SKO, such as win rates, and then at year end, so 3, 6, 9 months after, have we actually improved win rates? Have we grown the pipeline? Right? Have we grown the portfolio if we're trying to cross sell products? Whatever some of those key themes are that maybe we're talking about at SKO. But I love that Melody is talking about going to the next level because it's one thing to measure, did they like it and were they satisfied? But when the CRO comes back and says, what did we get for our $1 million investment or 5 million or 10 million or however big your organization is? Why is this justified? And why couldn't it be a web meeting, right? Or why couldn't it be a recording? I think we really need to look at, are we creating some behavior change? Are we creating that excitement? What are those things that we're really getting out of it?
Yeah, and John saying senior management alignment on goals. I mean, sometimes they don't have alignment on goals. And that's a problem in an SKO if they don't have that alignment.
Well, and I love that from John because I kind of know where he's going with that. And if we really think about the sales vision, do we have the managers aligned with that sales vision? And one of the ways to do that is to ask, okay, what's their plan for their teams? And did they create a vision plan or some sort of execution plan? And can they articulate that? So you can actually check that. And even we'll talk about in the platform or some different ways, you can see if they're doing that and if it's actually working over time.
Yeah, and Adam is really raising it. I mean, I like engagement scores. I think in an in-person SKO, you have more of an opportunity to move the needle than if everything is pure virtual. But I think that's another very valid SKO objective engagement and also a thing to measure.
Yeah, so Elizabeth calls out, and I really appreciate this because making peace with qualitative measures. So not making that a bad word, right? So do they like it? Do they believe? What do they believe about the organization? How do they feel about working there? I think those can be really valuable to look at the engagement and the culture. And at least we know if we can influence those, we need to pay a lot of attention these days to that culture aspect and how people are engaged. And if they don't like it, they're probably going to go look elsewhere. And so what are we doing? Ultimately, we might be able to measure retention and employee engagement on surveys. But, at first, at least, did they like it? Did they feel like it was worthwhile?
Yeah, I would second that. I think Elizabeth is really raising a very valid and important point, which is not everything that we do is quantifiable, and a qualitative measure oftentimes is just as important, particularly when you get to engagement. It can lead to quantifiable data, but not everything is as measurable as maybe a CRO would like it to be.
Yeah, so I'll just take one other comment here from Adam, and it's great because that's kind of where we're headed with this, which is it's tough to track sales activity right across the whole team and tie it to strategy and the roadmap conversations. But if we have breakouts, and what we'll talk about is kind of virtual breakouts after the fact to say, well, wait, are we actually getting traction on these particular initiatives? Again, are we growing pipeline? Are we increasing the size of this deal? Are we improving win rates? What are those key metrics that we're looking for? I think that becomes really interesting. All right, so great. Let's keep going here. These are some interesting questions to think about because some of those objectives, as you all called out, but building camaraderie and culture. How do we know that? So we can ask some of those qualitative, and I think several of you pointed that out, and I saw a comment just at the end. The idea between qualitative, quantitative, it may be more leading and lagging indicators, or looking at those forward-looking. Hey, if they're engaged and they're doing the behaviors, we'll probably get the results we're looking for. So we need to track and manage both. But how do we know if we're actually building and we're accomplishing that networking activity? Are they applying the learning? So if we have some skill building, are they actually doing that? So are they creating that call plan, or are they using those skills and techniques? And how do we know if that's happening? And is it sustained over time? So what's happening 30, 60, 90 days, or somebody said 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. So are we actually looking back at that? Did we actually improve those productivity metrics, those performance metrics? And is it working? And then again, the question I think the CRO or VP of sales is going to ask is, did this have an impact on sales? And even though we can talk about, oh, it was great and everybody loved it, it's like, well, yeah, but did it help? What did it help? And are we really tracking those outcomes? And I think that gets back to some of those, more results oriented or outcome based measures over time that we want to be looking for. And we'll talk a little bit about how we might do that. What else would you add to this, Dave?
Well, I think this is a good segue into our next topic, which is really, when we think of an SKO, it's a classic event, right? And, I know we probably have a large L&D audience here. Event-based training typically isn't that productive. So I like to tell when we work with our clients to think of an SKO as one piece of an ongoing comprehensive training program. If you view it just as a 1 day, 2 day, 3 day event, I mean, your results almost by definition are going to be limited.
Yeah, so thinking of it as an initiative, and I really think even beyond just training, this is about change management, right? This is about behavior change. Are you affecting the behaviors of the organization? And are they moving together in a direction you're hoping? So I think a lot of that starts with, well, what's happening before the session to get them primed? What's happening during to make it as engaging as possible? And then what's happening afterwards that we can track and measure? And it should be, part of an overall strategy. I think often we get so focused on the keynote speaker and the entertainment events, and maybe there's some team building, and the event kind of takes on a life of itself. So the during, we spend a lot of time, but let's think of it as an ongoing program towards an end, right? What is it that we're trying to accomplish? And then how can we actually affect that? So let's dig into that a little bit further, Dave. When we think about that before, during, and after, these are some of the best practices. And now with technology, I think we can enable some of these things. There are lots of SKO tools or apps that you can, provide, or learning platforms even that can help with that. But the idea that beforehand, we really want to generate some excitement. We want to set the expectations. We want to start communicating. We want them to know what's coming, not just here's your reservation in your hotel and show up, drinks on the first night. But what can we really expect? What are you expected to do? And to get their head in the game, if you will. And extra credit if you get the managers on board and sharing the same message. So we want the managers to be talking about, hey, this is exciting. Here's what we're going to be covering. This is why it's important. So getting the leadership team bought in and supporting that, and then realizing, hey, this is going to be engaging, but making even the pre-learning, or if there's a pre-read or materials, make that collaborative and fun. So maybe there's a way of connecting people using your social or connection, Teams and Slack and whatnot. And then even leveraging asynchronous. So if there's a video or maybe a leader kickoff, something that can, start to create that momentum beforehand. And then during the meeting or event, as you mentioned, Dave, we need to be realistic. So one of the challenges we see is clients trying to entertain, trying to network, trying to talk about new initiatives and the vision and all of the executive conversations. And at the same time, we're doing a day or two of training. People get so overwhelmed that we're really not accomplishing any of the objectives well. So I think we really need to be realistic. We need to make those connections and think about, why do we need them in person? What are we going to accomplish when we're there? And then what's going to happen after? Do you want to add to that, Dave?
Well, I'd say that about realistic expectations. I mean, I get I talk to clients a lot, and a common conversation, the first call is, hey, we're doing some kind of national or global sales meeting. We want to do training. So the presenting problem is we want to do training. But if you drill down, what they really want to do is just fill up time on an agenda, right? So when we start talking about what a training program is that will result in behavior change, it's like, well, we don't have 2 days. We don't want to do all that reinforcement. Can you do it like in a half day? Then the half day becomes like 1 hour. So you really have to start with, being very realistic about what kind of expectations you have, what your goals are. I think logistics also play a problem. We've done programs where it's 300, 500 people in a big room at a hotel, right? And then the question is, well, how are we going to do breakouts? How are we going to do role plays? And it's like, well, 500 people in theater style sittings, you're probably not. So you really need to kind of think through what's practical if you are going to do training at an SKO, and maybe the SKO, the time should be used to kick off the training, right? To announce or launch the training, or do one discrete module of training, but maybe scale it back because there's so many distractions in an SKO that oftentimes it's not the best place to do training.
Yeah, I completely agree. And John mentions about doing skill development. I think it's a great time that he talks about role plays, right? So if you've introduced a concept and you have everybody together, it's a good breakout, right? To get them engaged, to practice. I mean, that's an age-old technique to use. But I think even beyond that, if we're using a platform or we have a way of keeping that alive, what we want to do is introduce the concept, but then have them apply it. So for instance, go out and apply this to your accounts, and then we're going to do a follow-up, a virtual or again, within a collaborative platform way of engaging them to see if it's being applied and how it's working. And then we keep that alive, after to reinforce that skill development. So I think that during, obviously you need to be effective and realistic about that. And then afterwards, make sure we have that ongoing plan. And how do we keep that magic alive where we brought everybody together, we invested in having them network, they're making those connections, they're sharing stories. Well, how do we keep that going throughout the year? And so one of the things we're really excited about is leveraging technology to make those connections in a real cohort type setting. So that social connection where they can share what they're doing, they can comment on each other, they can really connect in a way that helps them learn from each other versus a talking head on the stage. And so they're able to keep that alive. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, and then understanding how we're going to measure it going forward.
Yeah, Ray, I just want to add, during the during phase, you have maximized networking opportunities. People are there. You spend a lot of money getting people together. The best learning obviously is going to happen collaboratively, sharing best practices. So whatever you do, whether it's 1 hour, whether it's a half day, whatever you do training wise, take advantage of the fact that you spent a lot of money to get people together in the same room, and come up with activities where they can break out into small groups and network with their peers.
Yeah, that's great. So really good discussions from the team as well, or from our audience today. Team role playing, skill development, other activities. Let's talk a little bit more about the after, though. And this is something that we've seen evolving, and we're pretty excited about because one of the concerns and complaints we often hear is, well, it's good in the session, but we don't know what happens afterwards. Or whoever that speaker you brought in introduced some concepts, but as soon as they're back in the office, they kind of forgot what happened. So how do we make sure it happens? And I believe creating that collaborative learning environment is a great way to do that. We'll talk about what it's trying to address. So, David, I'm sure our audience are pretty educated, sophisticated group here. I've probably seen the forgetting curve before, but do you want to walk us through this, and how's this relevant to our discussion today?
Well, look at as you said, Ray. Most people here have an L&D background or sales enablement, know that without reinforcement, right, the training isn't going to stick. And I would take it further. I think the curve is even steeper during an SKO where there's so many demands on participants' attention, right? There's so much going on. They're traveling. They don't have a lot of time, and they may not be focusing. I know, Ray, that you were working on an SKO. I think it was in Las Vegas where people were up all night and they literally stumbled in from the casino. They didn't go to sleep at all. We had another partner. He was doing something in Mexico where it wasn't a casino, but they were at the bar literally all night, and they showed up with their drinks in hand for an 8 a.m. training session. So that's what I mean by I think the forgetting curve at SKOs are even steeper than normal.
Yeah, that may accentuate the forgetting curve. It also makes it a little more challenging as a facilitator, for sure. But that's why I think it's appropriate to think, well, what can we do? Maybe it's to kick off the program. Maybe it's to introduce a few concepts, and then think about that ongoing reinforcement, right? And so if people have seen, the expansion of the forgetting curve, it's, well, we can improve that with ongoing reinforcement and skill application. So has that been built into your SKO plan? And do we really know what's going to happen, after they leave and everybody goes back to their own region or their own locations? So one of the things we've seen evolve, and we're using with our training programs in general, but leveraging collaborative learning and spaced learning as a way of reinforcing that. So we believe this digital blend, and if you've been on other webinars before, you probably heard us talk about that. We branded it as CLX, right? A collaborative learning experience. But what it is really a digital blend where we're introducing concepts. Maybe that's videos, maybe that's content pieces. Maybe we're interviewing and doing voice of the seller videos that are being sent out. And those are things that could go out beforehand and get them thinking about the program. And then the actual skill application, as several of you pointed out, maybe that's where we start practicing. We have them do some of the role plays, or we have them think about, okay, bring in your field work, and then let's discuss your account plans during those sessions. So we're really leaning in on, well, how do you apply this to real work and in the day of the life, and making that as practical, not generic scenarios or industry neutral examples, but applying it to their real life scenarios, and then discussing and collaborating. So we can do that to some extent in the SKO, but we believe doing that on an ongoing basis. So they now have another activity or another assignment, building that training roadmap, and then saying, well, when we get together, we're going to showcase some of your examples. We're going to highlight the challenges you're having, and we're going to have a coach that's going to facilitate those discussions and give feedback. So we mentioned a flipped classroom, and thanks for pointing that out. But flipped classroom, instead of delivering the content live in person and having them apply it, we're going to flip that, and we're going to deliver the content in advance in some means. So that may be micro learning, that may be through self-study, asynchronous. And then we're really going to focus the classroom time on the application, and the classroom time either being in person or virtual. So I appreciate, we should clarify that when we're using those types of terms, but I think that can be very valuable in an SKO setting to think about, how do we flip it a little bit so we're not just broadcasting, drinking from a fire hose, but we're trying to get that out in advance. We're trying to reinforce it and apply it during the session, and then we're following up so that we can have that ongoing discussion. And then in the platform that we use, and there are a number of them out there, but having ways to have discussion boards and ongoing application where we're posing a question, or they have a prompt or an activity they have to respond to. One of the things we really like about that is now you can track who's engaged. Are they doing the work? And when we come back and say, well, wait, did this make a difference? We can see those who are engaged and did the work, how are they performing? And you can start to actually correlate, is this making a difference? Are we growing the pipeline? Are we improving our win rates, right? So we can really benchmark that against who's applying the skills, and is it making a difference? What else would you add to this, Dave?
Well, I think that the digital blend solves a couple of challenges posed by the SKO. First of all, it's obviously very scalable. And in the world of an SKO where you could get up to hundreds and hundreds of people, that's important. I also think it gives you flexibility so that if your time on the agenda gets shrunken down, you still can do a very effective training because with a digital blend, the training's already chunked out for you. I also think it gives you a before and after and reinforcement component built into it. So we're big fans of this for an SKO where the time is very limited and you want to have a very clearly defined before and after. I think this kind of approach does that for you.
Yeah, and the one thing I'll just point out, because again, we've heard this over the years from senior sales leaders, we've heard and felt the frustration is, well, we don't really know afterwards, right? We don't know how well this landed or how well the application, other than, some survey scores. With a platform, and we use Intrepid, but again, there are other tools, other platforms out there. But one of the things with Intrepid, we can create a mission or an assignment that they have to complete, And we can track the points. Who's done that? How much progress did they make? And it's amazing to me to see the friendly competition among a sales team when you put up a leaderboard and say, okay, here's what we're tracking, and we expect you to do these 3 activities over the next 30 days. And maybe it's a follow-up, maybe it's a discussion, maybe it's a video, but they have some activities to do. So that's where that very simple gamification, I think, can be a valuable way to see if stuff's happening, right? And are we actually making progress? And I know many organizations then can assign a badge, right? So it's not enough to just go to SKO and get the concept. You have to do these activities to then complete that badge for whatever that program or that certification is. And that's a great way to actually see if the skills are getting applied and the work's getting done. So let's just cover a couple of, some feedback we've gotten over the years. And then we'll also want to allow time for some questions and wrap up. But one of the things about collaborative learning, and I'll say this is for collaborative learning in general, not just SKOs, but quotes we've heard, they really value learning from other sellers, hearing their best practices, sharing and troubleshooting, having the idea that you're applying this to real world customers on a day-to-day basis. So after the SKO, they're expected to go back and see how this works or bring in a scenario that they're working on. They can share what's working and what didn't work, and then get the feedback from others that they can use going forward. So they may actually be able to advance the deals based on the feedback they're getting and best practices sharing with others. And then probably my favorite quote in the upper right there is, a client of ours that said, if I look at the audience that participated in the program 12 months ago and look today, they're leaders within the business. So those who went through the process, who engaged with each other, maybe learned to coach and collaborate, are now the ones who are looked to as the leaders for those particular concepts. I know you've heard additional feedback, Dave, and probably other comments along the way. Anything you would add to this?
Yeah, I mean, I would just emphasize that, we've had great success with collaborative learning. And like you, I'm always very impressed by the level of competition and diligence in terms of people completing programs. I mean, obviously, there are a lot of great platforms out there. We have one that we like, but we're not in the technology business. We're in the training business. And there are a lot of platforms you can use. You can use very simple platforms, complex platforms, but really the concepts of collaborative learning, really are the same, irrespective of what platform you use.
Yeah, well, it's a great point. And I think, even if that's, we have clients that just, the collaboration may be a chat and sending in the homework, or you're kind of doing it old school. It's not like the concept is new. I think the platforms can help enable that and also track it, in a different way. So just to, kind of wrap up, and then we'll definitely take questions or other comments if there are, using the SKO as a way of aligning the team around the priorities and what's important and how do we address what's coming and get everybody on board, give them a chance to kind of engage with that. Thinking about the before, during, and after. So engaging well before the event to start building that momentum. And again, change management needs to be a process, and we need to think about it before they just show up and now they're expected to lean in. So really gaining that momentum and excitement and getting them engaged beforehand. And then the reinforcement afterwards to encourage the retention and the skill application, and really thinking of SKO that's one piece of a much larger experience that's going to create the outcomes you're looking for, right? Whether that's skill development, whether that's the application and alignment to the vision, whatever those things are, we need to align and design it accordingly. Anything you would add to this, Dave?
I think that at a high level, now, I mean, look, at a lot of SKOs start in January or maybe February. And I would think now, if you're planning an SKO, thinking about how to be very focused on what your objectives are. If you have a laundry list of things you want to accomplish, you may not accomplish all of them. So I would rather have fewer things on my list than more.
Yep. I think that's a really great theme. And, there are a couple of questions we can respond to. One that Adam brings up is, rarely do we get enough information and time to be proactive and build the materials and the strategy. and give the materials in advance. And I think that's reality. And I definitely hear that is, wait, we don't even have the agenda set until a few weeks before. I would say whatever you can do, even if that's, interviewing the CRO and having him talk about or her talk about the expectations. If there is a, pre-reads or any materials you can share, whatever is available, I think it's great to start getting that out there and having them thinking about it, building that mental picture of what's coming. But I understand priorities change quickly, and we need to be, we need to be responsive to that. Absolutely. So yeah, if you have any other questions, please feel free to add in. John asked a practical question, I think, about PDF writable workbooks. And, that may be a follow-on discussion. That's, I think, maybe one of the easiest and cheapest ways if you're trying to create something they can complete. But there are definitely other tools and technologies that you can use to manage that. But it really depends on the application and the budget and, the tools available. I think we use it for our simple workbooks because it's a great way that everybody can kind of engage and not have to try to, take notes in a tablet or something.